So please join me in welcoming back writer-director Mary Bronstein, as well, hold for applause, as well as our guest moderator for tonight, Mariah Gates, who's a film critic and author.
Mine's on now. Okay, everybody breathe. Breathe in, breathe out. Okay. Yes. Here's Mary. She made this amazing film. I've seen this film twice now, and I think it's astonishing. I think it's an astonishing piece of work. And I know that it was inspired by true events, not exactly as they had aspired here, but I think emotionally true events. Could you talk a bit about taking something so emotional and putting it into art?
Yeah. So about 8 years ago, when my daughter was 7 years old, she became very ill. And I'm a New Yorker, we're New Yorkers, and we had to go from New York to California to get the specific treatment that she needed. And the two of us, my husband stayed home for work, and the two of us stayed in a really shitty, tiny motel room for 8 months, two little twin beds, and nowhere to go. And as you said, thank you. I didn't do everything that Linda does in the film, but I did need a place to escape to. And for me, it was the little tiny bathroom in the motel room. And when the lights would go out, and I would see the goddamn red numbers of the machine, which in the movie, as you just saw, I make expressive as a flood of red light, because that's what it felt like. I would go into the bathroom and shut the door and turn the light on and drink cheap wine and binge on junk food, and just I had an existential crisis in that little bathroom, like literally a ego death, like a K-hole, but without the K. And what came out of it is this film, and what I was trying to capture on the page and then take from the page to the screen was that feeling that I just described, a feeling of disappearing, and the terror of that, disappearing into the task of taking care of my daughter, getting her better, and going home, and then the dread of, well, wait a minute, she is going to get better, and then what is that? What happens then? Who am I then? And I tried to capture it and put it on screen so that the viewer may experience that exact feeling.
I think experiential cinema is certainly what you made here. It's a film that puts you literally, I think you said this, into Linda's eyeballs almost.
Yes.
And you start with this extreme close-up of Rose Byrne.
Yes.
And it, even though you do pull back, it does kind of feel like you're always in that close-up through the whole movie. Can you talk a bit about finding Rose and knowing she was right for this, for bringing Linda to life?
I mean, first of all, how good is Rose in this movie? I mean, she's a genius. She when I wrote the script, I was not thinking of anybody. I had blank faces for everybody. But then when I started thinking of who, I was like, oh my God, I have just written a huge check that some performer has to cash, and it's got to work, or because she is the movie. And you know, I needed somebody who understood comedic timing intrinsically, naturally, had a natural ability for that, because the humor beats in this film are what allow the audience to have a release so that I can take them as far as I do into the darkness and uncomfortability. And then I also needed somebody who could do the raw and visceral, turn yourself inside out performance that's required. And then I also wanted somebody who is sort of beloved as an actor, so that even if it's subconsciously, when she first appears on screen, you have a kindness towards her. And that list is extremely, extremely small, and Rose was always at the top of the list for me. And I think it solidified with me when I saw, I don't know how many people have seen it, but she had a show called Physical. And I saw half of the pilot episode of that, and I thought, well, that's the audition tape for this film, basically. And I'm lucky enough that she responded to the material and she wanted to do it.
And then you made a really bold choice of keeping her daughter off screen for almost the whole film, so centered on her. How do you craft a performance with an actor knowing that they're going to be filling up the screen for so much with a child, but the child's not there? Like, how do you work on that?
Well, first of all, so any scene that that Rose is performing, that Rose is in, where the child is in also, but just by voice, Delaney Quinn, who played the child, is actually there. So I never had Rose ever acting against, as you would call it in the theater, against an empty chair. The person is always there. Delaney, as the child, was always there, and that's the difference between, acting is reacting, and that's the difference between acting and reacting and pretending. So she always needed to be there, and it's the same with the phone calls. When she's talking with Christian Slater on the phone, Christian Slater is on the phone. And when we rehearsed for those scenes, we rehearsed them as if they were going to be in the same room. To me, it's a scene. It just so happens that one person is on the phone. So she's never pretending to talk to someone on the phone. And I think that that is how you get this type of performance, by giving the performer the luxury of actually not having to pretend, of having the person there.
Then you have two sort of out of character castings with Conan O'Brien, who's a very, very stone-faced therapist, and A$AP Rocky he's always charming and good-looking, so that's not that out of character, but he's fantastic in this movie. He's very charming. Can you talk a bit about those two casting choices?
Yes. From the start, I wanted this movie, nothing in this movie, to be sort of typical or tropey or something that the viewer could get ahead of. And in that, I was also making casting choices. So there's a very typical way that one might cast a therapist, and we all know that trope. It's sort of Judd Hirsch in a chunky cardigan, and a beard, and that's one way to do it. I, as somebody who's been in therapy for since I was 14 years old, I'm not going to say how many decades that's been, but it's many decades. I have had good therapists and bad therapists and every kind of therapist in between. I've never had the kind of therapist that I see in movies and TV. I've never experienced that. And so what I wanted to do was capture not how therapy is maybe in reality as a documentary or even as a fantasy, but how therapy feels. And how it feels is sometimes very painful and sometimes very heartbreaking, and sometimes like you're in a one-sided intimate relationship. And so for me, the therapy, the relationship between Conan and Rose's character is the love story of the film. And in fact, I call their last session that they have the breakup scene. And so in thinking about that, I was thinking way outside the box, and I literally have been a fan of Conan since I was a teenager, since his first late night show came on. And he's such a familiar voice and personality in my mind. And one night while I was thinking about the casting, I was listening to his podcast, and he was interviewing David Letterman. They got into a serious part of the conversation. I heard a tenor in Conan's voice that wasn't familiar to me. And it kind of ended up being like a little bug in my brain. And I was almost scared to say the idea out loud because it sounds so absurd. And I'm lucky that my partners at A24, when I said it, they were like, yeah, okay, let's try it. Let's see what's the worst that can happen. He says no, and in the back of my mind, it's like, no, the worst that can happen is he's not good. But and that's to Conan. When Conan read the script, he was so taken by it, luckily, and he was scared to death. And he spent our whole first meeting on Zoom basically trying to talk me out of this idea of casting him, very actively so. And he was scared, and he said, I'm scared to death to do this because I've never done anything like it before, but that is why I'm saying yes. And that is kind of the energy with which I did everything with this film. And so that's when I knew my instinct was right on that, and that it was gonna be good. And he's fantastic in the film. He worked so hard, and he is not playing himself, and he is doing it's a proper, fantastic performance. With Rocky, I also went down some traditional roads, and then A24 said, what about looking at some musicians, since we're already doing some non-traditional casting. And I looked at a few, I met with a few, and then I went on the Zoom with Rocky. He turned on the Zoom camera, he grinned at me, and I was like, holy shit.
Done.
If I better land this meeting, because that is Jamie, that's James. And luckily I did. And I worked with Conan and Rocky for about a year preceding filming. And the work that they did, how seriously they took it and availed themselves to me is, I think, evident on the screen.
I want to talk a bit about Caroline, who I think is the most heartbreaking part of this film.
Yes.
She's a woman going through a crisis, supposed to be seeing a therapist that's supposed to help her through crisis, who's also going through a crisis.
Yes.
And things get kind of dark. Can you talk a bit about sort of developing that character and delving into the postpartum psychosis, which I think is not something we like to talk about with motherhood?
No, nobody likes to talk about it, but it's something that's a reality. Some women, after they give birth, go through something called postpartum depression. It's very dismissively called sometimes the baby blues. But then if that progresses, it can progress into something more serious, which is postpartum psychosis, which is when the dangerous and awful things happen that we see on the news. And we only hear about it when these tragedies happen that make it to the news. And then there's never a conversation that happens afterwards or between these awful stories of, well, how could this have been prevented? What support maybe do mothers need? What is this condition, so that you can even, because a lot of women, when I was doing research for this character, a lot of women, when they have it, have never even heard of it, so they don't even know what it is, and they don't dare to say anything because they don't want to be crazy and they don't want their baby taken away from them. I think we can all agree that Rose's character should not be. She should be on family leave. She should not be practicing.
Yeah.
She's not effective, but she's holding on to her job as a form of identity, as a way to not just be mom of sick kid. I am also this other thing. But she is completely ineffective and completely drops the ball, and we see the tragedy that happens with Caroline. And Caroline is almost, in my mind, when I was writing it and creating the movie, is almost in a different movie.
Yeah. Yeah, just like the one part that's not funny at all.
She is not funny at all,
No.
and she's in a melodrama. She is in a Bronte sisters novel. She is running down the beach in a flowy gown, and she runs into the darkness, and we never see her again. And we can imagine what happens to her. But for me, a pivotal point in the movie is when she turns around, and Linda and her meet eyes, and Linda decides to let her go.
Yeah.
And she goes. And to me, that is the point in the movie where where the ending starts. And it's one of the choices it's the choice, I think, that Linda makes that is the most difficult choice to swallow for me as the creator.
Yeah, a lot of bad choices.
A lot of bad choices.
A lot of bad choices. I think one of the main lessons as a parent is don't bargain your way into getting a hamster.
Don't bargain your way into getting anything, because the second you do, you regret it.
You mentioned her going into the darkness, and obviously the dark void of the hole in the ceiling, that's also the hole in her heart, that's also the hole in her daughter's stomach, that's also every literal thing that's ever gone into her brain, apparently.
Yes.
because of the sound design of it all. I'd love to hear how you landed on the sort of tactility of that hole. There's everything is in that hole. The sound, you can almost smell the hole.
Yes.
Yeah.
The whole for me is it's going to be something different for everybody, and it's fascinating to me to hear people's interpretations. So I don't want to give too literal a response to that question, but what I will say is that it is the place where one stuffs everything down that one doesn't want to deal with, doesn't want to remember, doesn't want to admit, and it's the place where an ostrich might see when they stick their head in the sand. But the thing about trauma is that it's more terrifying to me than a guy coming after you in a movie, with a knife, because that's an external terror. This is an internal terror. If you have trauma and you don't deal with it, it's inside of you. It's inside of you, and it's going to get you. It's going to get you, no matter what you do. And when it gets Linda, we see what happens.
Yeah, she definitely tries a lot of ways.
A lot of
the
ways.
wine, the stuffing of the peanut butter cups. I believe she orders a brick of cocaine at one point.
Attempts to.
Yeah, it's a lot of coping that's not really coping. I particularly, to circle back to the therapy, that she's a therapist, seeing a therapist that's in the same office, I feel is both very comical but also maybe indicative of how hard it is for working mothers to leave their work, I guess.
Yeah.
It's the easiest for her to just go down the hallway.
Yeah.
Was that a thought when you were sort of, all the different ways that she's sort of trapped in the versions of herself?
Oh yeah, I mean, she's in hell. She's in hell, and whether we want to interpret it as a hell of her own making, or hell that's actually happening, that's for everybody to decide. But that is one level of hell. If we're gonna evoke Dante and his, that's one level, and she keeps going down. And one level of it is that she can't, you think, one of the first reveals of the movie is that you think that she's a patient. She's in her therapy office, and and she's trying to eke out as many minutes in that office as possible to not leave. Doesn't work. She's got to leave. And you think she's going to leave the whole building, and then she goes into her office, and she has a client waiting. And that is one of her hells, is that she cannot get away. At the same time that she wants to never leave her therapist's office, she can't get away from that relationship because she's right down the hall. It would be like living down the hall from a problematic boyfriend or something. She's totally ineffectual. When she goes into that room, she knows that she's going to fail, and that's another version of hell, and we go from there. But the inspiration for that was really, I had a therapist who, just as an aside, was telling me something, I don't even remember what it was, and he said, my therapist, and blah, 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 and my ears had completely shut off at that moment. I was like, what? My therapist has a therapist? But then I realized, well, of course he does. That's part of what you're supposed to do. But then, does his therapist have a therapist? And does that therapist have a therapist? And that therapist? Like, who is the top therapist? And can you just skip up to that guy? And then you realize, oh no, you can't, because there is no top therapist. It's like the Wizard of Oz. There's nobody behind the curtain. It's all a sham. It doesn't end. It's infinite. And one of the first notes I wrote when I was writing notes about the idea for this movie was Linda-therapist ? And that was an idea that I had it's fully conceptual and absurd that she should be in that same office. And if people notice the scape of that office, for me, I wanted it to feel like a void of like a spaceship. It's all white.
Yeah.
We have the white noise machines going. We have the ambient sort of music that's supposed to calm you, but that somehow makes you more anxious. And even the paintings on the wall are campuses, but they're white. And it's sort of like one of the first indications that you get of like, is this how this hallway really is, or is this how Linda is perceiving it?
That's that line that's beginning of the movie, perception is reality, I think is such a strong concept to start a movie with, because then it's really, Linda's perception is her reality.
Yes.
Our perception of what every single person in here saw a different movie.
Yes.
And every time you see a different movie, that's true, but like in this case, we're really, truly seeing different movies.
It's in a tradition of that. What I tried to do is make a movie in a tradition of that type of movie, which exists by other artists. And it's that everyone in here comes into the seat with a different brain, with a different life experience, with a different history and a different relationship to the themes that are on the screen. And so everybody is going to leave with a different interpretation and idea. And as an artist, there couldn't be anything that's more exciting to me than that, because any interpretation that anybody has is correct. It cannot be wrong,
Yeah.
because you had it. And that to me is exciting, and the type of art that I attempted to make.
On that note, everyone's homework is to go home and think as many questions as you can about what do you think the movie means, what did it make you feel,
What did you see?
what did you see in it? Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming,
Thank
sticking
you,
around.
everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for this conversation, Mary.
Thank you.